Good morning.
Good morning.
Chukwino, as we say in my people's language, which actually literally means you survived the night. It's good to be here today with all of you again on Piscataway territory. I was just in Lenape territory in Philadelphia. On Piscataway territory here in Washington, D.C. I believe almost everyone here was at the conversation yesterday. Yes, can you guys raise your hand over there yesterday? Okay, yeah, like 90%. Great. So, what has brought us into this room today? I'm not a science person. I was much more of like a bookworm in school. But I would say that what's brought us in this room today is of course faith, but it's also physics. To jog your memory, as I mentioned yesterday, in May, atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide reached 415 parts per million for the first time in 3 million years. To reiterate, the last time that carbon was at that level in the atmosphere, there were forests on Antarctica, the Greenland ice sheet did not exist, and the seas were 50 feet higher than they are today. So we as a species, people who you'd identify as Homo sapiens, were not walking the earth. So this is an unprecedented moment in human and geological history. This is a fundamentally new problem that humanity has never faced before. But I also wanted to talk about physics because a big question that we face, in a way that I'd like us to think about this, is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. So it's also about social physics. It's about that paradox that many sort of philosophers have thought about over the centuries. And what do I mean by that? It might be a curious thing to say. So in order to understand the Green New Deal, I think you actually don't need to think about the buildings that are just to the north of us here, or just across the street. But instead, you actually need to think a little bit about social movements and about theories of change. So back in July, I was in Detroit for the debates, but also for an action, a big march that the Sunrise Movement, their allies in the SEIU, their allies in the environmental justice movement were organizing at the same time as the debate was happening. They were organizing it to sort of show our grassroots support for the Green New Deal. And to me, actually, that part of the Green New Deal conversation is probably much more important and more primary than what is happening on Capitol Hill. After the action, a couple of the Sunrise leaders, a guy named Will and Varshini, who I'm sure some of you guys have seen her speak before, she's a really amazing speaker and leader, gave me a ride back to the airport in Will's hatchback, which had a broken hatch. It was like one of these activist cars that, Will wears like sandals and has his glasses, and he's tall and he's skinny. He just really looks the part of the environmental activist, I would say. And we were talking about theories of change, and there's this sort of book that has become a little bit of a really important sort of intellectual touchstone for folks in the progressive movement who do this kind of work over the last few years, and that's called "This Is an Uprising." And it's by these two guys, these brothers, Mark and Paul Engler. And they are very interested in this social movement theory called momentum. And momentum is this theory of organizing that is built off of the research of a woman named Erica Chenoweth, who has done this really fascinating set of studies of what it takes, doing all these comparative studies of social movements that have succeeded in changing regimes and changing institutions, and what kind of movement it requires to win that kind of change. Because of course, if we are going to win a Green New Deal, we need to win the kind of power that can fundamentally change our economy from one that's based upon fossil fuels to one that's based on clean and renewable energy. And so Chenoweth has done these studies of sort of what it has taken to topple regimes with nonviolent mass civil disobedience. And she found that there's this thing, it's basically there's this 3.5% rule, where if you get 3.5% of the population actively engaged in that kind of a campaign, usually you're actually able to unseat the dictator or achieve the kind of high-level institutional structural change that social movements are fighting for. And so in the United States, that means that we would want to have a climate movement, a movement of people who are fighting for a Green New Deal that has about 10 to 11 million active participants. And so while the Sunrise Movement and what they were doing in Detroit was really encouraging, there was a few thousand people who came out, including 1,000 or so members of SEIU who showed up in their purple shirts, doing the thing. We have some growing to do. Of course, we need to recruit more people into this movement. It can't only be a movement of young people. It also needs to be a movement of our elders. It needs to also be a multi-generational movement. It also needs to be a multiracial movement. It needs to be a multi-class movement. And of course, it also needs to be a multi-faith movement. And so one half of course, the unstoppable force, the immovable object, is building that unstoppable force. So this is one side of that equation. The other side of it is the immovable object. And what I mean by that is, firstly, that we have lived in an era, the last 20 or so years, where the denial of climate science has become an ingrained element of one major political party's ideology. And there's been a number of great books about sort of the influence of the Koch network and a number of other sort of corporations, chiefly ExxonMobil, who firstly knew about climate science, even built their oil rigs taller to accommodate for rising seas, then obfuscated about that science, put out ads in the New York Times, the Washington Post, on television, knowingly sort of muddying the waters about research that they had done in the 70s and 80s, and then even more perniciously were able to get the entire Republican Party at this point to sort of buy into that idea. So that set of ideas that are denying science are one significant part of this. There's also the immovability of some of these institutions, right? So we're also talking about the Electoral College. We're also talking about many states that have been gerrymandered so that the voting majority in those states are not represented in their legislatures, are not represented by their members of Congress. We're also talking about the Senate, which as an institution, despite the fact that the majority of people in this country vote Democrat, Wyoming gets 2 senators in the same way that the 34 million or so people in California get 2 senators, and that significantly skews our nation's politics. And we're also talking about parts of those institutions, internal to those institutions, things like the filibuster, right? The 60-vote majority that it more or less requires now to pass any sort of legislation, and the way that people like Majority Leader Mitch McConnell have weaponized that tool to basically create a veto against any sort of democratic legislation getting passed or even coming to the floor for a vote. So I think the big question of our time, right, is what happens when this unstoppable force encounters this immovable object. What happens when we build a movement that is powerful enough to take on these institutions, to demand change? What happens when that encounters the existence of the Senate? How obstinate is that institution, and how can we make that institution move and change? What are not only the scientific and climate tipping points, but what are the social and political tipping points? I think that's a big question. So I think enter now the Green New Deal. What is the Green New Deal? The Green New Deal is a progressive vision to tackle the twin crises of climate and inequality. I'll say that again one more time because I believe you guys are doing some lobbying, and I think having that one-liner is really useful. The Green New Deal is a vision to tackle the twin crises of climate and inequality. I'll give a brief history of the recent sort of iterations of Green New Deal. It's worth noting that there have been various sort of political and intellectual stakeholders who have also landed on the idea of a Green New Deal. Barack Obama, for example, had it in his platform in 2008, although he didn't really talk about it that much. Thomas Friedman has some claim to the term, the Green Party has some claim to the term, so this is not, those three words strung together, it's not the first time that's happened. But more recently, the Green New Deal emerged onto the scene the week after the 2018 midterms. I'm sure a number of you saw this, when the Sunrise Movement led a sit-in in soon-to-be Speaker Pelosi's office. And at that time, the Green New Deal was actually, what they were fighting for was a select committee to be dedicated to a Green New Deal. So they were asking for some of the institutional resources of Congress and of the party to be dedicated to studying and then drafting legislation for a Green New Deal. And of course, as I'm sure many of you are aware, we did not achieve that demand. So we pivoted. And in February, when the new Congress was seated, the Green New Deal was introduced as a resolution by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York and Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts. And what is a resolution? So just so everybody knows, a resolution is a non-binding piece of legislation. It's a non-binding vision and articulation of goals and values. So the resolution, even if it was passed by the House and the Senate, which it has not been, would not commit the United States to building out any sort of programs through its various federal agencies, nor would it commit any sort of dollar values, etc. It would be a statement of principles and a statement of sort of our vision for how to move forward. Parts of the Green New Deal, though, are still being drafted. So this idea was introduced as a resolution back in February, and we are now starting to take different parts of this and to develop white papers, to develop policy positions, to develop principles, to study public opinion on various elements of this, to understand how we can optimize essentially both or three elements: climate goals, job creation, and justice. These are the three pieces of the Green New Deal that we really want to make sure that we are optimizing in any piece of legislation. The think tank where I work, which is called Data for Progress, is doing that work alongside a number of other organizations and thought partners and experts. Actually, I just came from a really wonderful gathering in Philadelphia where a number of academics and wonks came together, and people gave presentations on what different parts of the Green New Deal might look like, how you might design those, what the issues we might face are, and then we sort of came together also behind the scenes to discuss some of those problems. So getting experts organized is also an important constituency here. So while it's while the Green New Deal is getting drafted, another thing that has been very encouraging is that at this point, all of the presidential candidates have put out their climate plans, and they have been heavily influenced, I would say, by the Green New Deal. My think tank is finishing up a summary of scorecards and also an assessment of the whole field's climate plans on 48 different elements of a Green New Deal. And what we found is that, firstly, there has been an enormous change in what leaders within the party were talking about in 2016 and what they're talking about now, which is very encouraging. We've also seen a significant adoption of those three core Green New Deal pillars, which are, again, climate ambition, job creation, and justice. And that overall, in the sort of war of ideas, which does matter, I would say, the Green New Deal is significantly pulling the center of gravity in the party towards ambition, towards issues that matter to everyday people, and then towards actually taking action on this issue if we are to win the White House and the Senate in 2020, which would be enormous and would be very encouraging. But while we are still sort of working on how the different sort of mechanisms and levers and how the gears fit together on a Green New Deal and what to prioritize, it is very important that our leaders, our elected representatives on Capitol Hill and beyond, frankly, understand that there is broader support for this idea. It is really essential that our allies in the Sunrise Movement, the young people who are striking for climate, the people who are showing up for the global climate strikes, have a broader constituency, and that folks on Capitol Hill aren't just hearing from young people wearing the black and gold Sunrise gear, but they're also hearing from their constituents in the labor movement. They're also hearing from their constituents in the environmental justice community. They're also hearing from their constituents in the faith community. And so that's why I would say what you guys are doing today is incredibly important. I would say that every time I go up to Capitol Hill, representatives or their staff are asking not just about where are the young people on this, because at this point they know where the young people are on this, but they're also asking about other constituencies and communities and groups with an important voice in our broader society have to say about this. So it's really great that you guys are here. It's really great that you guys are getting educated, that you're getting organized, because as I said, if we're going to win, we need everybody that we got.